The Marvels lands at number 1 over the weekend at the box office, but where does it land in the MCU? I'm Adam, this is Does It Hold Up, and we're going to be talking about what happened at the box office this past weekend. As always, let's start with those top 10. In first place was The Marvels, with $46,110,859 in its opening weekend. We're going to touch upon that just a little bit later in the show, but up front, I just got to say, that came in under projections. People were thinking it was probably going to get about 55 to 60 million, maybe 65 million in its opening weekend. It actually ended up only making that 46, much lower than anybody expected. In fact, coming in Sunday night, they had it listed at 47 million, and that was relatively low, and then it came in a million under that. This is not a good sign for Marvel, who's been struggling already, and sorry, I guess people just don't care about Captain Marvel. In second place is Five Nights at Freddy's in its third week, with another just under $9 million, a 53% drop, but it's made $127.2 million so far, so it did all right. In third place is Taylor Swift The Eras Tour. Yet again, in its fifth week, it's still making money. Makes just over $6 million, a 55% drop, but I'm pretty sure Taylor is very happy with how this is all played out, because if you remember, she actually went straight to AMC to get this movie distributed. She paid for the movie out of her own pocket to get made, so there's no middleman who's going to be taking any money from her. This is all her and the theater. So that $172.7 million that it's made so far, they're both getting a nice chunk of change out of this. In fourth place is Priscilla in its third week with 4.7 million, well, just under 4.8. It only had a 5% drop from last week, which is pretty good considering it went from limited release to wider release, made a lot of money, only dropped 5%, so they must be very happy to see that. It's taken in 12.7 million to date. In fifth place is Killers of the Flower Moon in its fourth week with a very disappointing, I feel like I say that every week with this movie, a very disappointing $4.5 million, a 33% drop, and it hasn't quite crossed $60 million yet. In sixth place is The Holdovers, which is new to this list, but it is in its third week of release. It was in very limited release in week 1, expanded just slightly in week 2, and now it's in about 750 to 775 theaters nationwide, and that's how it makes this list. It made $3.2 million, had a 467% increase over last week, and has made $4.3 million so far. In seventh place, brand new to this list and to theaters, is Journey to Bethlehem with $2.4 million. This is a big Sony picture telling the story that pretty much everybody knows of the birth of Jesus Christ. I'm shocked that this hasn't been talked about more, that people haven't really been talking this up. When I first saw it, I thought, oh look, another small independent studio is trying to make a movie. Nope, it's from Sony. But I guess they had no faith in it. I do want to see it for one reason and one reason only. Antonio Banderas is in it. I don't know how he ended up in it, but yeah, I love him. In eighth place is Radical with another $1.7 million, a 35% drop, but it's taken in 5.18 already. In its seventh week, in ninth place is Paw Patrol, the Mighty Movie with $1.7 million, a 16% drop, but it's just about $64.5 million. It's probably going to be out of the top 10 next week. We got a ton of new movies coming out, which we'll get to, but it had a nice little run for 7 weeks. And in 10th place, The Exorcist Believer in its 6th week with $1.1 million, a 46% drop, and it's made $65 million so far. It's definitely going to be out of the top 10 this week. It didn't make as much money as it probably needed to for the $400 million that the studio paid for the rights to the franchise, but it's a decent start. Movies out of the top 10 this week are What Happens Later, the Meg Ryan rom-com after just 1 week, After Death after 2 weeks, and Freelance also after 2 weeks. 3 movies that had zero marketing, and most people didn't even know were coming to theaters, so it's no surprise they didn't last long. So The Marvels, not a great opening, but 46 million is nothing to roll your eyes at. This was a lower budgeted film compared to some other Marvel movies because they were trying to take it back to making more intimate stories and spending a lot less. But when I say that, it still had over $100 million budget. So Don't get it confused. They're not spending $15 million to make these movies. So opening up to $46 million isn't the worst thing if you were any other movie outside of the Marvel franchise. But because you're in it, people expect a lot more. So I wanted to take a look at what are the lowest opening weekends in the history of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In first place, you guessed it, the Marvels. In second place, all the way back in 2008, is the Hulk, or the Incredible Hulk, with $55.4 million. In third place would be Ant-Man from 2015 with $57.2 million. Fourth place, Captain America, the First Avenger from 2011 with $65 million. And fifth place, the fifth lowest opening weekend in Marvel history, is Thor, also from 2011 with $65.7 million. The only one on here that really makes a lot of sense, well, I should say the only two on here that make a lot of sense, would be the Incredible Hulk from 2008 because they didn't market it well. And let's be honest, it's just not a good movie. It's one of the reasons that they replaced Edward Norton with Mark Ruffalo. The other one, though, is Ant-Man from 2015. Yeah, I guess. Sure. If you don't read the comics, you probably don't know who Ant-Man is. It's kind of hard to pull. I know Iron Man, everybody always says is like a C-lister from the comics that they turned into an A-lister. But let's be real here. He had a cartoon back in the 90s about him, the Invincible Iron Man. He wasn't a nobody. People knew who he was. I don't think he was a C-lister. He was more like a B-lister, not quite an A-lister. But Ant-Man, he's even below that. He's probably low C's, high D-lister. Nobody knows who he is outside of the comics, so it was really shocking to see him be one of the forefronts of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Somebody that gets their own origin story. If they wanted to use him, they probably could have fit him into somebody else's story. But, he's got 3 movies now, so clearly it's working. Maybe. But I wanted to dig a little bit deeper also into the Marvel Cinematic Universe because we're currently in Phase 5. The Marvels was the 3rd movie in Phase 5. Now, if you remember, Phase 1, 2, and 3 were known as the Infinity Saga, and it was amazing. People ate it up. But a lot of talk has been about how Marvel's been struggling lately. Ever since Endgame, all the way back in 2019, it feels like they're just not putting their best foot forward. And we're not getting the best movies from them, the best stories, the best acting, the best anything really. It all just feels like it's a step down from where we were. Do the numbers reflect that, though? So I went through and I looked at Phase 1 through Phase 5. What is the highest opening weekend for the movies in each phase? And what is the lowest opening weekend for each phase? A little experiment here. And then I took what was the average opening weekend of all the movies listed under each phase. So let's take a look at Phase 1. In Phase 1, we have The Incredible Hulk from 2008 had the lowest opening weekend with that $55.4 million. The highest from that phase, The Avengers from 2012, which had an opening weekend of $207.4 million. The average opening weekend for all movies inside of the Phase 1 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe was just under $104 million. So if they put a movie out during Phase 1, they were expecting $104 million on average in its opening weekend. That's a pretty healthy number, but it gets better. If we take a look at Phase 2, the lowest, Ant-Man from 2015, had that opening weekend of only $57.2 million. The highest, Avengers Age of Ultron from 2015, which had $191.2 million. The average, $116.3 million. If you can see, that's a little bit of a step up here. So we went from like 104 to 116. Let's see if it continues in that way. So if we take a look at Phase 3, Ant-Man and the Wasp from 2018 was the lowest in this phase with $75.8 million, and the highest was Avengers Endgame from 2019, which has a record-breaking $357.1 million in its opening weekend. Insane. But the average for them was $162.6 million. So if you take a look at Phase 1, 2, and 3, it goes from 104 to 116 up to 162. That's excellent. That shows people getting behind the movies, wanting to see them right when they come out. The anticipation is building. Marvel's doing a really good job of building up this universe that people are connected to, that they want to come see this movie as soon as it comes out. They can't wait. They don't want to wait 3 weeks to see it. They don't want to wait a month. They don't want to wait till it's on streaming. They need to see it in theaters because it's the hot thing and everybody's into it. But that's where everybody says the decline started, right after Avengers Endgame. So let's take a look at Phase 4. In Phase 4, the lowest was Eternals from 2021 with only $71.3 million. The highest, Spider-Man No Way Home, also from 2021 with $260.1 million. Now, a little caveat on this phase in particular. This phase was rushed between 2021 and 2022, and that's because of obviously the worldwide pandemic that hit everybody, where theaters were closed and no new movies were coming out. So Eternals might have done better if it hadn't been delayed and, theaters were back to full capacity. Maybe some of these movies do a little bit better. But the average opening weekend for this phase was $142.8 million. Most of that was helped by Spider-Man No Way Home, but that's still a pretty healthy number. A significant drop, obviously, from Phase 3, about $20 million less, but that's to be expected. We hit that high of Endgame, and now we want to see if they're going to start building something back up. But you can see the anticipation was still there. Even though theaters were only at 50% capacity, 60% capacity, and some people just weren't comfortable going back to the movies yet, the movies were still opening pretty well. I mean, the Eternals was the lowest opening, and yet it still did better than like Ant-Man and the Wasp from 3 years earlier. So anticipation's still a little high. But when we look at Phase 5, which is the phase that we are currently in, the lowest movie is The Marvels from this year with that $46.1 million. And the highest is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, also from this year, with $118.4 million. The average opening weekend so far in Phase 5 is $90.2 million. I know, that's insane. If you take a look at that, that's $143 million down to $90 million. That's a $50 million drop just over these two phases. That's not a good sign because it shows that people aren't really invested. They don't want to go back to the theater. They don't care about what the next movie's coming out. Is there superhero fatigue? For sure. Is Marvel maybe putting out too many things? Absolutely. They're having 3 movies out this year, plus another 3 TV shows, plus. There's always something going on, and people just can't keep up with all of it. That could be it, or it could just be people don't care what's happening now. Endgame came and went. A lot of these new characters people aren't connected to. We don't care what happens to them. I know I haven't been the biggest fan. I think the quality of these movies has dropped a lot as well. They seem to be throwing $250 million at these movies, thinking the more money they spend, the better the movies are. But these movies just lack some heart. There's no real great story. There's no great characters. There's really nothing to get behind. If you look at the movies from Phase 1, they were all about individual stories that could connect to a larger universe, but they made sure they focused on that story in that movie. Now I feel like each movie is just another piece to get us to the next movie. And then to the next. And then to the next and the next. And you get it. I don't know. But the numbers don't lie. Quick news update, because I know I haven't done a news video in a while, but the SAG strike is over. You've probably seen it everywhere. A bunch of other channels have already covered it, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. It's just nice that people are going to finally be able to get back to work, and new movies are going to get written, acted in, made, produced, distributed. We're actually going to get movies in theaters. If this strike lasted any longer, the big summer movies next year were going to be affected. It sucks for movies that just moved, like Dune Part 2. Dune Part 2 was supposed to come out the week that the strike ended, but they had already moved dates. So it's a little bittersweet, but I'm glad that it's over. And as always, we're going to end it with what's coming this weekend. First up is Next Goal Wins. This is the true story of the American Samoa soccer team who lost a match 31-0. And then this movie picks up with them a decade later to see how they're going to bounce back when trying to re-qualify for the World Cup. Yep, that's a movie they made. It stars Michael Fassbender, Oscar Keightley, and Kaimana. Kaimana? Not sure how to pronounce that name. It's directed by Taika Waititi. It's rated PG-13. We saw an early screening of it. We're going to have a review for it this week. Next up is Thanksgiving. This is a movie I'm actually kind of excited for. I really want to see this one. It's a mysterious Thanksgiving-inspired serial killer terrorizes Plymouth, Massachusetts after a Black Friday riot ends in tragedy. We're getting a Thanksgiving-themed horror movie. I'm here for it. Carve them all up like a turkey. Let's see how this goes. It stars Patrick Dempsey, Rick Hoffman, and Gina Gershon. It's directed by Eli Roth. It's rated R, and it hits theaters this Friday. I'm here for it. Can't wait to see it. The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Yes, a new Hunger Games movie is coming to theaters this Friday as well. It's a prequel movie that focuses on the 10th annual Hunger Games and how a young President Snow, obviously before he was the president, develops feelings for the District 12 tribute that's participating in the games. Seems weird. I don't really want to see this one, but I'm going to see it because I've seen all the Hunger Games movies and, got to finish the story. I think it's unnecessary. This feels like a huge cash grab. It stars Rachel Zegler, Tim Blythe, Viola Davis, and Peter Dinklage. It's directed by Francis Lawrence, who's the man who directed the last 3 Hunger Games. So if you like the way those movies were made, at least you know what you're getting with this one. And it's rated PG-13. The last movie to talk about is Trolls Band Together. You guys know the Trolls. In this one, Poppy discovers that Branch has brothers that she's never heard about and that he used to be part of a boy band. Or a troll band? And they're going to journey to reunite the band and save one of the brothers who's been kidnapped. Sure, I guess. The first Trolls movie wasn't that bad. Trolls World Tour was not a fan of. But who knows? Maybe this one's good. You know what? They got NSYNC back together for this one. They put out a new single for the first time in 20 years for this movie. Maybe that's a good sign. Who knows? It stars Anna Kendrick, Zooey Deschanel, and Justin Timberlake. It's directed by Walt Dorn and Tim Heights, rated PG, also hits theaters this Friday. So it looks like this weekend there's going to be some good movies in theaters. Let me know in the comments below which movies you're going to be checking out, and make sure to check back in with the channel this weekend to see our review of Next Goal Wins. And if I do happen to check out Thanksgiving, I'll try to put out a little something for that one as well. All right, we'll see you next week for another box office roundup and see how well it held up. Until then, be good to yourself, be kind to others, and keep watching movies.